may be a spot in your life where you're wondering, what are you doing? Is what I'm doing, does it matter? Are my devotions, do they matter? Is the time that I spend reading God's Word, is that important? Is the time that I spend praying, is that important? Is what I'm doing making a difference, or am I doing something wrong? Because one of the biggest things that we always deal with as people is we are driven by the result. And we look for the result to show if what we're doing is right or wrong. But sometimes God puts us on a creek, He puts us in a place, and the exact same thing that you're doing for the first 2.5 hours is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So you doing your devotions, but not really seeing a result that you think you should be seeing, doesn't mean you stop doing your devotions. It's about us being able to do things over the longevity of our lives. But a lot of times, we will get to a spot, and after a little bit of time, guess what we do? We just stop. We quit. We go do something different. You ever known somebody who they couldn't stay in one place very long at all? They got to keep going from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing because they're looking for a result. And if they can't get to that result fast, what are they going to do? They're going to stop and change locations, change space. They're going to do all of this stuff. Jesus is trying to teach the disciples in the passages that we've been going through that if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, that life is going to throw curveballs at you. That even whenever you think you're on track and you think you're doing it just right, that something's going to come up in your world, something's going to happen, and it's going to throw you off from what you thought you were doing was supposed to be the right thing. And so if you have your Bibles, I want you to turn to Mark chapter 9. In Mark chapter 9, we've been through there a little bit, but in Mark chapter 9, we talked about a couple weeks ago what is called the Transfiguration, where Jesus takes 3 of his disciples, and they go up on this mountain, and Jesus meets with Elijah and Moses on this mountain. And we go through this whole story, and we see how Jesus says, look, I'm it. It's not that you follow the law. It's not that you follow the prophets. You follow after me. And God sends his Spirit down and says to these 3 disciples, this is my son, listen to him. So our conversation really revolved around who are you listening to? So this week I want to bring something else up into your brain that I want you to pay attention to. That if you're writing down, taking notes, putting it in your phone, whatever you do, here's what I want you to think about for a minute. What is your if? All right, so what is your if? Say it back to me. What is your if? And we're going to go through this story because Jesus comes back down, and in Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 14, we see a conversation that takes place. Here's what happens. When they came to his disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw Jesus, were greatly amazed, ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, what are you arguing about with them? And someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. So stop there. So here's what we got happening so far. We've got Jesus and his 3 disciples coming back down from the mountain. When they get down from the mountain, Jesus sees as the other disciples, how many disciples in total were there? 12. So 3 minus 12 minus 3 is what? You're working on it. You're in college still. It's okay. There's 9 disciples left. So these 9 disciples are here, and Jesus and the 3 walk down, and Jesus sees these 9 disciples and a big crowd all with them. Now, this big crowd of people and the 9 disciples, they look over, and they see Jesus, and it says they are amazed and run towards Jesus. Now, you look at that for a minute and go, okay, that's kind of normal, right? Not really. People didn't run to amazement in Jesus whenever he was walking around. They would come to see what was going on, but right here we see something really intriguing happen. They look over and they see something distinctly different about Jesus in this moment that we're going to pause at for just a second because it's kind of cool. Where had Jesus just been? On the mountaintop with Elijah and Moses and the disciples. Now, in the Old Testament, Moses went up on the mountain and he met with God, and he came back down, and the people said about Moses what? He's glowing still. Because he's been with the Father, he is glowing. So everybody in Moses' world ran and said, what is going on? Like, you're glowing. Jesus is up here, spends time with Elijah and Moses, who've been glowing, and he comes back down. What is probably happening to Jesus right now? He's probably glowing. There's a shine about Jesus as he comes back down this mountain that catches all these people's attention. So they look at him and they go, what is going on? So everybody runs over to Jesus now and says, okay, and Jesus sees them and he's like, what's happening? Because you've got Pharisees, you've got a big scene happening here, and something is going on that has caught Jesus' attention, that has made him begin to go, all right, what have I walked into? When Moses had gone up on the mountain, he came back down. What had happened while he was away? They misbehaved in a really incredible way. When Moses goes up the mountain, the people that are left are like, you know what? Let's begin to make another God. Let's begin to create a God that we can see, one that we can pay attention to. And Aaron and the people that were left, that were close to Moses, they fell prey to like, okay, we don't know what to do here. Fine, let's do that. So in the Old Testament, they create this golden image. Moses comes back down. And how does Moses feel about this? Pretty angry, pretty upset. He kind of lets them have it a little bit. Jesus comes back down. And in the New Testament, we see a very similar parallel thing happening here. Because now what has happened is a man brought to the disciples his son who was demon-possessed and is like, hey, I need you to cast this demon out and heal my son. The disciples attempt to do it and cannot. This begins to create a massive confusion among the scribes, the leaders, the disciples. Everybody is like, look, these guys are supposed to be following Jesus. They're supposed to be doing something, and they can't pull it off. Have you ever felt like you were supposed to do something for Jesus, and you just couldn't pull it off? Every day. Just didn't work out. Well, that's what is happening right here. So here's what Jesus says as we go on in this. Verse 18. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. And he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. So we look at this and go, who is Jesus talking to? Because here we have the disciples. We have Peter, James, and John who have just been with him up there on the mountain. We have the scribes, the Pharisees, the crowd. We have all sorts of different types of people. And he says something very strong here. He says, O faithless generation, how long must I be with you? I mean, this is a pretty solid rebuke to this entire group. And so we ask the question, who is it that he's talking to? And what we find is he is talking to everyone that's there. Everyone in the room is getting this conversation. You faithless people. You faithless people. You faithless people. Is that one of those cool sermons that you want to go hear one day? Not typically. Typically, whenever somebody tells you that, you're on the lines of, well, okay, fine, that's just me. And you walk out not feeling successful at all. So Jesus is really getting to these people's hearts. He's really getting to their lives and going, I've walked with you, I've been with you. And you can't even trust and believe at this point right now. Verse 20, they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit that was within the boy saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground, rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. So verse 22 ends there. The Father has brought the boy to who? To Jesus. Before Jesus, he had brought the boy to the disciples that followed Jesus. The disciples that followed Jesus were not able to do this. So whenever the man comes to Jesus, do you think the man has hopes that Jesus is going to be able to do this? No. So this man comes to you and says, if you can do this, would you? The heart of Jesus here, we really begin to see something explode. Because here's what Jesus looks directly at the man and says, if you can, if I can, like really, do you know what, like have you heard my stories? Do you know what I've been doing? Like we have walked for the past 9 chapters through the book of Mark as Jesus has broken bread, as Jesus brought people back to life, as Jesus has done miracle after miracle after miracle. And for this guy to come up to Jesus and go, hey, if you can do this, like here he is. How many times, though, do we look at it and go, God, if you can. God, if you can give me happiness. God, if you can give me peace. God, if you can give me health. God, if you can give me hope. God, if you can give me money. God, if. Because we as people have gone to other people many times to try to get the answers to our ifs. And what has happened? Nothing. It failed. So we take all of that history, we take all of that, and we bring that to the feet of Jesus, and we go, okay, God, I'm not hopeful at this point. Like life hasn't turned out the way I thought it would. The things of my world haven't gone the way I thought they would. So God, if you can help me catch some fish, I'd appreciate it. God, if you can heal my boy, I would appreciate it. How do you think God responds to our ifs? And just think about that for a minute. How do you think God responds to our ifs? Because we're full of them. I mean, I would say each one of us are full of ifs. God, if you, then I. God, if you will, then I can make this happen. God, if. And we finally see in Scripture one conversation that is actually played out where God responds to somebody who said if. Because we're full of them. We're full of the ifs. So here's what response is. If you can, all things are possible for the one who believes. So Jesus tells this dad, you're questioning that I have the power? All things are possible for the one who believes. Who is Jesus referring to in regards to the one who believes? Ourselves, maybe? Himself is who he's talking about here. Jesus has a firm belief that he can do anything. And we've seen it happen. But oftentimes we look at it, and do we have that same type of belief? No. We look at it and go, God, if, then maybe. God, sometimes this is going to happen. Faith is a powerful tool in our life. Belief is a powerful tool in your life. Did you hear what I said there? Belief is a powerful tool in your life. Because with it, all things are possible. But also without it, guess what? Many things become impossible. How you and I have belief in things oftentimes is an indicator of how it is going to go. If you believe in something, you put your heart, your soul, your mind into it. You and I had the ability to oftentimes see something come to fruition much more easily than if we didn't have belief. So when it comes to joy in your life, there's oftentimes many reasons why we shouldn't have joy. Right? Name some of the reasons why we don't have joy as people. Okay, we're in a culture having to have everything. Pain. Do what? Loss. Work. Money issues. From the 12-year-old over there in the corner. Oh. That's true, though. Money issues. And because we believe that these things are not doable, it robs us of our joy, our happiness, all of these things. But whenever we have a belief that it is possible, all of a sudden, you begin to think differently about it. You begin to see the world differently when you see something as possible than when you see something as impossible. Jesus is getting to the heart of this father here. And he says, if I can, all things are possible for those who believe. And so here's what he says. Verse 24. Immediately, the father of the child cried out and said, what? Help my unbelief. In this moment, who has the belief? Jesus or the Father? Jesus does here. The Father is the one with the unbelief. And the Father is the one going to Jesus going, hey, okay, fine, I believe. Help the levels of unbelief that I have. Maybe this should be our prayer when it comes to the conversation of what's our if. God, I believe in you, but help my unbelief here. Because right now, I want to believe. I want to see the goodness. I want to see the hope. I want to see the potential in my job. I want to see that things are going to work out. But God, I want to see those things. But here's what the things that are in front of me are telling me. So God, I need you to do what? Help my unbelief. Is this a prayer that you have ever found yourself praying, or have you always been trying to rely on yourself for the belief? And because you didn't have the belief yourself, you felt like it would just never happen. Back to the impossible again. And Jesus is showing the disciples here. He's showing the crowd here. He's showing the Pharisees here. He's showing the scribes here. He is showing everyone that is here at this point that it is okay to come to Jesus and go, I believe, help my unbelief. So we do find that the Father here does have an element of unbelief. So, when Jesus saw that the crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him, and never enter him again. And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him up, and he arose. And when he entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? And he said to them, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. So Jesus heals the son. And at this point, it wasn't because of the Father's belief, but it was because of who? Jesus. You see, Jesus can do works in our life and through us, even in spite of us. That's a good news moment right there. That sometimes your unbelief is not what will limit Jesus. Because our unbelief, just like this father's unbelief, is a very real thing. It's not something that any one of us as disciples are void of. Unbelief creeps its way into all of our worlds at different moments because different tests create different reasons for unbelief. But here's what we find out of the disciples' moment here, that even in the moment of unbelief, Jesus is able to do something because the man cries out and says, help my unbelief. I want to believe. There's a good reason on the other side of my belief. But we get all the way through this, we get back to the room. The disciples, just Jesus. Now it's just the core group again. And remember, Jesus is trying to teach these 12, you will be able to do as I do. You will be able to go where I go. You will be able to say what I say. You will have the ability to accomplish the task that I can accomplish because I have you following me. So these 12 get back in the room. Now the 3 have been sworn to silence for what they saw up on the mountain. But the other 9 are in there, and they're like, Jesus, so you've got to help us out here. Why could we not cast this demon out? Why couldn't we do it? Because I would not say it was for a lack of complete belief. Because they've been believing, they've been following Jesus. But here's what we have found from Mark 1 to Mark 9, that these disciples, just like everyone else, had a hardened heart issue. They had an issue that they were trying to deal with internally. But they were also trying to show the world that they were something, even though they had a hard heart issue. When it comes to things of the Spirit, the Bible will always press in to our heart. And you can show everybody. You can go to church, you can sing songs, you can read the Bible, you can pray, you can do all of these things externally. But still, like these 9 disciples, have something happening on the inside, a problem going on internally. And then whenever the things that are real, the things of life, press in on you, and you as a disciple of Jesus begin to engage that and deal with that, if your heart is not placed in belief, then guess what happens? Failure is imminent. As disciples, don't pretend to be something that you're not. Don't pretend to be in a place that you're not in. If your heart is still questioning, here's what the disciples that were left here, these 9 disciples, they've walked with Jesus, but what they're still having to question, what they're still having to process is, he's going to die on a cross, and he's going to rise again. Do we really believe that? Because what they wanted out of the Messiah was for the Messiah to come in triumphantly, fix all of their problems, make everything better, and they wanted seats at the table. And they wanted to be in power, and they wanted to be in control. And so they had been following that narrative in their brains. But Jesus was still processing them through the idea of my kingdom is not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen. And whenever they begin to have to engage that within their heart, that's when the problems began to arise. So when Jesus has to engage our hearts, what is your if? God, if you can do this, then I'll follow you. God, if you'll make this happen, then I'll believe. God, if. And Jesus is looking in and going, oh, I can. I can do anything. Anything is possible to him who believes. Maybe what you and I need is a dose of that I believe. Lord, help my unbelief. Maybe what you and I need as disciples who are living in a culture that's constantly bombarding us with just junk, whether it be musically, whether it be visually, whatever it may be, what we need is to go, God, I believe. God, help me believe that I can make a difference. Here's the question. In a world that is full of all of the TV, all of this stuff, do you even believe you can make a difference anymore? Because a lot of adults that have gone through life at some point, man, whenever you're a kid, you want to be the hero. You want to be Batman, you want to be Superman, you want to be whatever it is. But the more that you go through adulthood, the more disappointments you find, and the more disappointments you find, the more withdrawal you want to have, and the more withdrawal you want to have, the more you look at the world and go, it's just a bunch of crud. And we know those people. Like, it's great. There are 2 types of people you can visit in a retirement center. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Here you go if you don't know what I'm talking about. So, I'm not sure we're going to put this on the video or not. So because this is going to get good. Caleb went to the retirement center on Friday, my 5-year-old. Now, 5-year-olds have zero filter. Caleb, did you have fun? No. Buddy, they were probably glad to see you. No. I'm like, well, did any of them talk to you and say hi to you? He goes, not really. One of them just sat there like this. I'm like, Caleb. Two types of people. One of them looks at life and says, it's all horrible. You go talk to the dude. How you doing? Awful. Why? World's horrible. Watch the news lately, it's awful. And the only thing to do is watch the news all day long. Talk to somebody else. How you doing? I'm just great. Like, how are you? I'm good. Like, what'd you do today? I got to color today. Went outside and I smelled the flowers. It was a great day. Two very different views on the world. And they both live in the exact same world. What's the difference? One of them believes the world's a good place. The other one believes the world's an awful place. You and I are deciding, how are we going to see the world around us? How are we going to see people? How are we going to see our lives? Do we still think we can make a difference? Or have we abandoned making a difference to just settling for surviving? I just want to be able to be here. If I go to my job, pay my bills, put some money in the account, eat good, I'm fine. Because at some point in our lives as adults, we're going to get there. We're going to get to this point where we're making a decision. Are we going to just settle for survival, or do we still think we can make a difference? Jesus was trying to get to the disciples, I want you to make a difference. I want you to see that with belief, all things are possible. That just because it is how it is today, that doesn't mean that's how it has to be tomorrow. That you may have to keep on fishing. And for a while, guess what? You might not catch anything. But that doesn't mean the creek's dried up and it's time to go home. It just means keep fishing. In your relationships, it may mean that the person might be mean to you, mean to you, mean to you, mean to me, mean to you. But eventually you have to have the belief that what? It's going to be better. Because if you give up on the belief that it's going to be better, then you're going to be just as miserable as the person being mean to you. You and I, as followers of Christ, we are the people that have the joy, have the hope, have the peace. We're the people that can walk into any scenario that is ultimately destructive and go, I believe God can restore this. That's what distinguishes the disciples. Because they're the ones that walk into rooms and go, I believe God can change this. Your finances may be awful, but we as disciples believe that, guess what? God can change this. Your job may be awful. You may have the worst boss imaginable. I mean, it may be the worst guy you've ever met in your life, or girl. Worst person ever. But as disciples, we have to look in on that and go, I believe God can change a heart. I don't believe God's done with you yet. And I may be the instrument that God is using to help reach you. So I'm going to be an instrument of peace. I'm going to be an instrument of hope. I'm going to be an instrument of joy. You may meet the most crazy people in the world that will come at you with all sorts of frustrations and aggravations. And they'll ask, why are you different? What is different about you? Because, I've told y'all, I'm like a magnet sometimes when I go on vacation. It's intriguing. And I always ask, God, why? And I always get to the same conclusion. Because it's not you, but me living inside of you. And anywhere you go, you're going to be an instrument of peace and an instrument of hope. That's who we are as people. That's who we are as disciples of Christ. So how do we get to this point? And that's what the disciples were asking Jesus at the very end. Jesus, how do we get here? Like, we thought we could cast that demon out. We couldn't. Why? Because some things come through praying. Sometimes you got to spend some more times on your knees in order to hear the voice of God speak in to the hardened places of your heart that you have not yet had belief in. Because just like this father, unbelief is still rooted in certain places inside of you. And what Jesus is trying to do, get to those places of unbelief. Because he doesn't just see you as the you now. He exists outside of time. So he knows the things that you're going through, to a person it's going to create in him. And so the struggle you may be having, it's okay. Believe that God is doing something good. The issue you're working through right now, the sin that keeps you battling you right now, believe God is up to something good. The way your finances look absolutely destructive right now, look at it and go, I believe God is up to something good, because it couldn't get any worse. We have to look at these things and see it that way. You and I are the lights of the world, the city on a hill. Be that in your job. Be that in your home. Are there reasons you could be opposite of that? Absolutely. There are reasons that, I know all of us in this room, there are reasons we could all walk in and be mad all day long. We could all choose to walk in here and be like, for the next hour and a half, we're all going to be mad together. And everybody be right. You have a reason to be mad. You have a reason to be upset. But we also have a reason to sing. We also have a reason to be joyful. We also have a reason for hope. We also have a reason for happiness. We also have a reason for peace. The fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, long-suffering. The Spirit living inside of us allows us, even in the midst of hurt, in the midst of corruption, in the midst of whatever you may be going through, to rest and go, I believe God is up to something good. And when I don't believe God is up to something good, when I can't see it, just like this father asked Jesus, Lord, I'm going to believe, but help my unbelief. That is such an applicable prayer for all of us. Because we all find these moments where we follow Jesus, but yet things around us seem crazy. And we have to ask the question, what prayer are we going to pray? Are we going to pray, God, if you can? Or are we going to pray, God, I believe. Help my unbelief. God, I believe you can change hearts. God, I believe that you can change situations. God, I believe that you can heal. God, I believe in you. Lord, help the unbelief that's hidden inside here. That is what Mark 9 is bringing to us this morning. And as a team and as a family, what is your if? Because it's probably sitting in there somewhere deep. And then whenever you answer what your if is, are you willing to pray, God, I believe. Help my unbelief. And if you are, be prepared for what God will do. Let's close our eyes and bow our heads.